What is up, Knicks fans? Welcome back to yet another episode of Fireside Knicks with your hosts Dylan and Ryan. And today we have an update on the Knicks head coaching search. Yesterday they interviewed Minnesota Timberwolves assistant Micah Nori. That is the first non-former head coach that they are interviewing. And it's an interesting candidate. You know, he's got a lot of experience as a coach in the NBA. No head coaching experience, but he's been around in the league for quite some time. So certainly an interesting candidate, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So Ryan, first off, tell me how you're doing. And secondly, what do you think about Micah Nori? What do you think about him as a coach and possibly even as a head coaching candidate for the New York Knicks?
Well, I'm doing great, and I really love that the New York Knicks are continuing to diversify their head coaching search. I think that it's important for them to talk to, interview with, and consider as many options as they possibly can talk to. Jason Kidd is still not off the table, despite that kind of being something that reportedly died a few weeks ago, but some reports have surfaced that that's not dead in the waters yet. Not highly likely, but not dead. And in the case of Micah Nori here, he is someone who has experience with Karl-Anthony Towns, working with Karl-Anthony Towns. I believe that that's an important perspective to have because I believe while Karl-Anthony Towns is a flawed NBA player and someone who should shoulder some blame for his defensive performance in the postseason, he is not a bad NBA player. This is a superstar. Or not a superstar, a star caliber player. Someone who is a top 25 to 30 player in the NBA, universally considered, or somewhere in that range. If you want to be very conservative with Cat, you could say it's 40 to 45. But I think we could agree that he is a better basketball player than Julius Randle, who was the number 2 option for the New York Knicks and also had defensive struggles before. Karl-Anthony Towns actually presents a lot of rim deterrence. He does not have a lot of rim protection, but by being tall, he has a lot of rim deterrence. I think he ranks in the 80th percentile in rim deterrence. And Dylan, the New York Knicks no longer have a team that they should be quote-unquote worried about that has a center that presents a massive challenge to Karl-Anthony Towns in the Eastern Conference. I know that Giannis Antetokounmpo would immediately obviously be the threat you think of, but I don't believe the Milwaukee Bucks are going to contend for the NBA Finals this year. The Boston Celtics never really had strong center play, but Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford obviously presented some troubles by being 2 quality 7-footers, and those, not only is Kristaps not on Boston anymore, Al Horford's a free agent, and Boston, not really sure they're going to contend. Finally, the other team I would kind of think of in terms of like, hey, they could kind of present a challenge to the New York Knicks is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And they do have centers who are very good defensively, and Evan Mobley has improved offensively. But again, I don't view them as the team that's going to hunt, target, and demolish Karl-Anthony Towns in the paint. So bringing in someone with some familiarity with Cat, knowing you probably have the best big man in the Eastern Conference outside of Joel Embiid, who can't really count on that health, man. You can't really do that. It might give the Knicks something that is a huge advantage to have going into this season and going into any hypothetical Eastern Conference postseason.
Yeah, no, and even just looking aside from that, you know, we've talked about how head coaching experience, at least in my eyes, is a little overrated, right? I do think it's important, don't get me wrong, but at the same time, I don't think they necessarily have to hire someone who has been a head coach for 15 years, 10 years, however many years you want to go down. I don't think they necessarily need to do that, because when I'm looking at Micah Nori's resume right here, he's been a coach in the NBA, granted, not a head coach, but he's been an assistant coach in the NBA since 2009. From 2009 to 2013, he was with the Raptors, 2013 to 2015 with the Sacramento Kings, 2015 to 2018 with the Denver Nuggets, 2018 to 2021 with the Detroit Pistons, and then ever since then, the lead assistant on the Minnesota Timberwolves. I think that's pretty important. You know, he's been around for a while. Seems like teams do trust him to be a coach on their coaching staff. It's why he keeps getting a job and why he's been able to maintain a consistent job since 2009. And I think what's also important too, someone pointed this out on social media, when Chris Finch got hurt, you know, the head coach of the Timberwolves, when he got hurt like a year ago during the playoffs, Nori took over as the head coach essentially. Like obviously Finch was still doing most of the calls and stuff, even though he was sitting down on the bench instead of standing alongside the sideline. But Micah Nori was kind of the voice, if that makes sense. Like he was kind of like the one who was relaying that info and getting the players to understand what their roles were supposed to be. And the Timberwolves went on a good run. I believe this was last year when the Wolves made the Western Conference Finals. So, you know, he's shown that he can kind of, you know, coach guys really well and really help lead a team, even in a situation where it seems like he should, you know, is kind of unprecedented. I mean, how often does a coach end up getting hurt? You know, especially like in Chris Finch's case, I believe he like tore his ACL. It was a pretty serious injury. But, you know, aside from that, he was able to, you know, step in at a time when you really need someone to step in and get that team far and make that team stay motivated, stay locked in. I think that's important. I do. And even aside from that, I've always been saying the offense is something that the Knicks need to really address this summer. I think Mike Nori could be good for offense. I do think so. I don't know too much about the guy right now, but I know for a fact that he's shown that he can lead good offenses. He can lead strong defenses as well. I think this is someone who could be an interesting candidate. Now, do I think it's likely that the Knicks will end up hiring Mike Nori? I can't say that right now because honestly, we really don't know much about this head coaching search other than that they've interviewed Taylor Jenkins, Mike Brown, and now Mike Nori. We don't know much more else than that. They're probably still looking at dozens of other candidates. As we're recording this, the NBA draft is tonight. The Knicks are probably not going to have a head coach until after the NBA draft is concluded, and it's a 2-day event, so that means at least until Friday, they will not have a head coach. And honestly, I expect it to go even longer than that. I wouldn't even be surprised if it stretches into July and into free agency before they get a new head coach. So, looking ahead with all that, I'm really intrigued by this person right here, Mike Nori. I'm intrigued by it. I do think that this will be someone who the Knicks will strongly consider. I mean, obviously they are if they interviewed him already. But, I do think that this is someone who has a good chance to be hired as a head coach. But at the end of the day, I still think the leverage is going to Taylor Jenkins and Mike Brown just because they have been head coaches before and they have proven that they can lead teams to success as head coaches. Because, we all know there are great assistant coaches out there across the league, but then they take on a head coaching role and it doesn't pan out, right? It happens all the time. And obviously, even head coaches, same way. They may be great with one team, but then they go on to a different team, and it's horrible. Or vice versa. They're horrible with one team, but then they get hired by a different team, and it goes great. So, really, I think that, asking Mike Nori for the interview and stuff and interviewing him, I think this is kind of just a way of weighing more options out there, kind of getting some more, more different faces out onto the table instead of just narrowing it down to Brown and Jenkins strictly, because who knows, what if they really don't like Brown and Jenkins, or what if they're considering something else? What if they want to go on a route where they're hiring someone without head coaching experience? That's probably what they're doing here with Nori. I know a lot of people have been saying Johnny Bryant, but at this point, it seems like Johnny Bryant is a long shot at this point. I don't think Johnny Bryant is going to end up as a head coach of the New York Knicks unless some sort of unprecedented scenario happens in the coming weeks. So, looking ahead to it, we got to kind of just focus on these three candidates that I've outlined at this point in time. I think Nori has a good chance, but at the end of the day, I don't think it's likely. I still think the leverage goes to Brown and Jenkins. I want to get your input on that because, Brown and Jenkins obviously have plenty of head coaching experience. Nori has not been the head coach of an NBA team at all, aside from, that brief stretch I mentioned in the postseason from 2 years ago. He hasn't been actually a head coach, so I want to get your input on that. Where do you think the Knicks stand in terms of the head coaching search, and who's kind of like the front runner right now?
So I'd like to point out there is something to like about each of these candidates. There is an appeal. There's an understanding as to why the New York Knicks would like to make either of these three gentlemen their next head coach. And that's something that's very important for the New York Knicks, having candidates that you can see the vision with. Mike Brown is someone who could take this offense to a whole nother level. Taylor Jenkins has worked with a slashing guard before as his star, someone who doesn't have the dynamic shooting traits of Jalen Brunson, although if you wanted to use shooting in a different context, maybe he does have more dynamic shooting traits than Jalen Brunson. Maybe not in a basketball context. With that being said, you would have I'm sorry, I had to make the joke. Taylor Jenkins, though, he's led multiple playoff teams. Micah Nori, one thing I really like, as you mentioned, the added experience came in the postseason. You have a team that is no longer having its head coach on the sideline. How do you keep buy-in? How do you handle that kind of turmoil? How do you keep this team focused and able to continue to compete and then not only just compete against Phoenix? They dominated Phoenix that year. They played very well against Denver, beat Denver that season. That takes a very strong leader to do, and I think leadership qualities are important here. You're trying to get buy-in of grown men. These are people who know their place in this league. Karl-Anthony Towns is not questioning his place in the sport. Mikal Bridges is going to get most likely a 9-figure extension. He's not questioning his place in the sport. OG Anunoby is one of the richest people in the world, right? He's in the top % of rich people now with his new extension. He does not question his space in the game. Jalen Brunson, same thing. Josh Hart, same thing. These are people who are confident in themselves. You need to be able to lead them. And I'd also like to say in regards to Nori, I really love the idea of someone who's been in around the game in a variety of roles, never in a head coach role, but still in a variety of roles, who's been around basketball, absorbing basketball knowledge, taking all that in, and being able to conduct offense or defenses based on what he knows. He's been around the game for a long time. He has seen basketball when scoring was not very dominant in the mid-2000s. He's been around basketball while scoring has been at new heights, and more teams are shooting threes than ever. That is the sign of someone who's willing to adjust. Because, Dylan, we have seen a lot of head coaches who were either A, kind of in the coaching ecosystem, or B, were guys who are some of the best coaches of that era kind of get phased out by this recent, or by the last decade of three-point revolution, a movement away from, being a mid-range shooting team, or kind of the big thing in the last few years, a priority of depth and bench, and using your bench and having a quality rotation, using all the modern data we have in basketball nowadays. These are things that I desire in a head coach. It's the ability to adapt and learn. I think that's something that Tibbs did really well when he was brought in as head coach, a very old school coach who still found a way to embrace new school ideas. That is something that I just heavily covet in any basketball mind. You want someone who's going to adapt with the times and is going to progress with basketball. You don't know where basketball is going to go in 10 years. I'm not saying we're going to have something resembling the three-point revolution, but what if something like double bigs come back into vogue, like we saw with the Oklahoma City Thunder, with Minnesota last year, at times with Mitchell Robinson and Cat this year. That is something that we thought was going to be dead in basketball. That the double big lineup was dead. That was not going to promote enough spacing for the game. But it might be back. I think also the Rockets did a little bit of that with Steven Adams for a little bit. So I could be wrong there, but I'm pretty sure they ran some double big lineups with him and Sengun out there. So these are things that we're just seeing in the game more and more. Again, I want a head coach who's going to embrace these new ideas. So Dylan, pretty happy with the candidates they have so far, and I'm not going to be mad with whoever they pick.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. And, I want to outline one more thing before we do wrap it up. To the people that say that this head coaching process is bad and all that stuff, just stop. What they're doing right now, this process is perfectly fine. They have no rush whatsoever to hire a head coach. They are the only vacancy. The season does not start for another 4 months. I mean, the NBA draft technically has not even begun yet. They don't need a head coach right this second. Yes, I would like one sooner rather than later, of course. I don't want them to hire a head coach right before training camp. I think that's a little bit late. But I don't want them to rush the decision either. I want them to take their time, do their due diligence, interview as many people as you can, even if they're just these assistants that maybe most fans had never heard of, or even if it's other coaches that they likely aren't actually going to hire, but they just want to see what they got to say, because who knows, maybe they do impress them a lot, maybe they learn a lot more about that person than they actually thought that they knew about him already. There's a lot of different ways you could go about this, but I don't think the Knicks are approaching this as if they don't have a plan. They clearly have a plan. They're doing it right now. We're seeing it in real time. It just seems that way because, everyone's still focused on the whole of them asking the other teams about their head coaches and stuff like that. Who cares? Who cares? I've emphasized before that I think that was a smart decision to do. See what the other teams feel about their coaches before you go ahead and interview the guys that they have interviewed so far. And so far, they have interviewed good candidates. That's really what I wanted to just, say about that real quick. But, just to wrap up the episode real quick, I mean, looking ahead with Micah Nori, again, I don't think he's going to end up getting hired. I would be a little surprised if he gets hired over Jenkins and Brown. But at the same time, I wouldn't exactly be 100% surprised either, because I know he's a very well-respected coach in the league. I know a lot of people, look at him very highly, especially the Timberwolves. He's the lead assistant. They really feel good about him. So who knows? He probably has just as strong of a chance as Jenkins or Brown in reality, but in my eyes, the way I see it, I think those other two guys still have the leverage over Nori. But that's not a bad thing at all. It's always good to kind of weigh out your options and see what's working and what's not. But we are up on 13 minutes. I do think this is a good place to finally wrap the episode up. Let us know what you think about Micah Nori in the comment section below, because I know a lot of people don't know much about him, and we would love to know what you guys got to say about him. We would love to talk with you guys about that. You can also follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and of course this YouTube page that you just watched the video on. You can also listen to the audio version of this on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating on those. You can follow me and Ryan's personal Twitter accounts. They are right there above our heads. And we'll see you guys in the next episode of Fireside Knicks. Peace out, and let's go Knicks.